For decades, Barry Gibb has been the voice, the heart, and the spirit of the Bee Gees, the band that defined an era, dominated the charts, and transformed the sound of pop forever. With his soaring falsetto and soulful lyrics, Barry became an icon, a man whose influence reached every corner of the music world. But behind the fame, the glitter, and the timeless hits, there was one story Barry never liked to discuss, the one person in the industry he truly despised. Fans have often seen Barry as gentle and diplomatic, the peacemaker among brothers. Yet even the calmest soul can carry deep resentment. In a rare and revealing interview, Barry finally admitted that there was someone he couldn't forgive, someone who betrayed him in a way that changed how he saw fame, friendship, and the music business itself. This wasn't just a creative disagreement. It was personal. The betrayal struck at the core of what Barry believed in: loyalty, brotherhood, and trust. For years he remained silent, letting the tabloids speculate and the fans wonder. But time, as it often does, brought clarity. Now, at this stage in his life, Barry Gibb has decided to speak the truth about the man who caused him the deepest wound of his career. The story isn't just about anger. It's about heartbreak, rivalry, and redemption. And once you know who it was, you'll never hear a Bee Gees song the same way again. Before there was hate, there was admiration. Barry Gibb had always been the kind of artist who believed in harmony, not just in his music, but in life. Alongside his brothers Robin and Maurice, he built the Bee Gees from humble beginnings in Australia into one of the most successful acts in the world. The group's unique blend of soul, pop, and emotional storytelling captured the hearts of millions. Yet, as fame grew, so did the attention. And with attention came envy, ego, and competition. By the mid-1970s, the Bee Gees had become unstoppable. Hits like Stayin' Alive, Night Fever, and How Deep Is Your Love weren't just chart toppers. They were cultural milestones. But for Barry, success always came with an awareness that not everyone in the industry celebrated their triumphs. Behind the smiles and handshakes, there were whispers of jealousy, mockery, and resentment from other artists who felt overshadowed by the Gibb brothers' dominance. It was during this golden period that Barry crossed paths with the man he would later call his greatest disappointment. The unnamed musician, once a friend, collaborator, and ally, seemed to share Barry's love for soulful melodies and heartfelt lyrics. They talked about creating music together, bonding over late-night jam sessions, and mutual respect for the craft. Barry admired him for his talent, his charisma, and his apparent sincerity. To Barry, this was more than a professional relationship. It was a brotherhood beyond blood. But in the cutthroat world of show business, loyalty can be fragile. As the Bee Gees' fame exploded, jealousy crept in. According to those close to Barry, tension began when his friend publicly criticized the Bee Gees' sound, dismissing it as commercial fluff that lacked the rawness of real rock and roll. Barry, who prided himself on authenticity, was stunned. The remarks felt like a stab in the back. "We poured our souls into those songs," Barry later said. To have someone I trusted mock that, it hurt more than any critic ever could. What followed was a silent feud that played out behind the scenes for years. Industry insiders recall cold glances at award shows, tense encounters at recording studios, and a growing distance between two men who once shared laughter and ideas. While Barry remained polite in public, those close to him knew the wound ran deep. He had been betrayed not by a stranger, but by someone who knew him well, someone who had used their friendship for personal gain and publicity. It wasn't just the betrayal that stung. It was the hypocrisy. The man who mocked Barry's pop success secretly envied it. While the Bee Gees continued to dominate charts around the world, his own career faltered. Instead of rebuilding his image, he lashed out, using interviews to take subtle jabs at Barry's music. "He wanted what we had," Barry once admitted in a private moment. But instead of working for it, he tried to tear it down. Despite the bitterness, Barry refused to retaliate publicly. He chose silence, channeling his emotions into songwriting. But that doesn't mean he forgot. The friendship that once inspired him now haunted him. A reminder that fame can blur the lines between admiration and resentment, between loyalty and betrayal. As the years went by, Barry learned to live with the pain. But it remained one of the few things he never fully forgave. "I can forgive mistakes," he once said, "but not dishonesty." Behind every hit song and every glowing smile, there was a part of Barry Gibb that still remembered the sting of that betrayal. The friend he once trusted, the artist he once admired, and the man he came to truly hate more than anyone else. For Barry Gibb, the betrayal wasn't sudden. It was a slow burn that revealed itself over time. In the beginning, he tried to dismiss the criticism, convincing himself that jealousy and competition were just part of the business. But as the years passed, the bitterness from that one former friend only deepened, and Barry began to realize the extent of the damage it caused. The man in question, once a close collaborator and confidant, began publicly ridiculing the Bee Gees during interviews, award ceremonies, and even in casual conversations with other artists. What hurt Barry the most wasn't the words themselves, but how personal they felt. It wasn't just about the music anymore, Barry later reflected. It was about trust, about friendship. I had shared my heart with him, and he turned it into a weapon. At the height of the Bee Gees' fame, Barry's name was everywhere. His songwriting and production work extended beyond the group, helping artists like Barbra Streisand, Dolly Parton, and Kenny Rogers achieve chart-topping success. He had everything: wealth, fame, and respect. But behind the scenes, the betrayal gnawed at him. While the world adored his falsetto voice and flawless harmonies, Barry quietly carried resentment that no hit record could heal. One particular moment stands out in his memory. During a televised awards show in the late 1970s, the man who had once been his closest musical ally made a smug remark that instantly went viral. It was meant as a joke, but to Barry it felt like the final blow. "He laughed at our success in front of millions," Barry said. "He made me feel small, like everything we worked for was a punchline." For years, Barry stayed silent. He refused to engage in a public feud, believing that dignity and grace were the best revenge. But those closest to him, including his brothers Robin and Maurice, saw how deeply it affected him. Maurice once commented, "Barry doesn't hate easily, but when he does, it comes from a place of real pain." In private, Barry's anger was less about ego and more about disappointment. He had believed in brotherhood, the kind that went beyond fame or competition. He and his brothers had built their careers on loyalty and unity. To see someone he once trusted turn so cold reminded him how lonely success could be. "In this business," Barry once told a friend, "you learn fast who's clapping for you and who's just waiting for you to fall." As the years rolled on, the Bee Gees evolved, experimenting with new sounds and adapting to changing musical trends. But Barry's heart remained scarred. Every time he heard that man's name, a flicker of anger resurfaced, not because of what was said, but because of what was lost. "I could have forgiven him if he'd just been honest," Barry admitted years later. "But he smiled to my face and stabbed me in the back." The betrayal became a turning point in Barry's career and personal philosophy. He began to distance himself from many in the industry, choosing instead to focus on family, legacy, and longevity. The glitz of Hollywood and the glamour of fame no longer held the same meaning. What mattered to him now was authenticity, both in his art and his relationships. Still, the experience taught him an invaluable lesson. Success attracts both admiration and envy. It revealed the darker side of the music industry, where friendship can quickly turn into rivalry, and trust can be the most fragile cord of all. Even decades later, when Barry reflected on his long career, he didn't shy away from the truth. "I've met thousands of people in my life," he once said quietly, "but only one ever made me feel hatred. And it wasn't because of what he said, and it was because I once called him a friend." While the public saw Barry Gibb as the ever-composed frontman of the Bee Gees, charming, talented, and unbothered, behind closed doors, a cold war simmered for years. The feud between Barry and the man he once considered a brother in music became one of the most quietly enduring rivalries in the entertainment industry. It was never loud or public. It didn't need to be. The silence between them said everything. Barry had always believed that the best revenge was success. As his band reached astronomical heights, selling over 200 million records worldwide, he kept his head high and his emotions in check. Yet deep inside there was an ache, the sting of betrayal that no award could dull. Whenever the two men's paths crossed at events or recording sessions, the air seemed to shift. What had once been warm familiarity was replaced by polite indifference, cold smiles, quick handshakes, and eyes that said what words couldn't. People in the industry noticed it too. One producer who worked with both of them later admitted, "You could feel it. They'd be in the same room and you'd sense this tension." Barry would stay professional, but his guard was up. The other guy? He seemed to enjoy getting under Barry's skin. As time went on, their careers took different paths. The Bee Gees continued evolving, writing timeless hits that outlived trends and defined decades. Meanwhile, Barry's former friend faded from the limelight, but instead of letting bitterness consume him, Barry turned that pain into purpose. He poured his emotions into music, songs about love, loss, and the fragility of trust. To those who listened closely, there were lines and melodies that hinted at heartbreak beyond romance, the quiet grief of a friend turned enemy. Barry's brothers often tried to comfort him. Maurice, ever the peacemaker, once encouraged him to let it go. "You can't carry it forever," he told Barry. But forgiveness didn't come easy. "I can't hate someone and pretend I don't," Barry replied. "But I also can't forgive someone who never said sorry." Still, he never lashed out publicly. While others in the industry might have used interviews to settle scores, Barry stayed silent, an act of restraint that only deepened the mystery around who had wronged him so deeply. To fans, he remained dignified. To those who knew the truth, his quiet strength spoke volumes. Over the years, the man who betrayed him tried to reach out. A few mutual friends hinted at reconciliation, but Barry always declined. "There are things you can't fix," he reportedly told one of them. "Once trust is broken, it's gone. You can't sing harmony with someone who betrayed your heart." The feud became one of the most whispered about secrets in music circles, a story few dared to discuss publicly. Yet its emotional weight never left Barry. Every time he stood on stage and saw fans swaying to his songs about love and pain, he was reminded that betrayal isn't limited to romantic relationships. Sometimes, it comes from the people who share your dreams. Ironically, as Barry grew older, the very person he despised began to speak more kindly about him in interviews, perhaps as a form of regret. But for Barry, the damage was irreversible. "It's easy to say nice things when time has softened the truth," he said once. But where was that kindness when it mattered? Behind the glamour and fame, this silent feud shaped Barry Gibb in profound ways. It made him cautious with trust, selective with friendships, and deeply appreciative of the rare people who remained loyal. It also fueled his songwriting with emotional truth, giving his music that rare authenticity that connected so deeply with millions. And though the world may never know the full story of who hurt him, Barry's music carries the echoes of that betrayal, proof that even the brightest stars have shadows, and even legends have wounds they never fully heal from. As the years passed and Barry Gibb watched the world change around him, something else changed too, his perspective. Time has a way of softening even the hardest edges, and while the wounds of betrayal never truly faded, Barry began to look back on his life with a quiet wisdom that only age can bring. He had seen everything, the rise to unimaginable fame, the tragic loss of his beloved brothers Morris and Robin, and the decline of the disco era that once made the Bee Gees kings of the world. Yet through it all, Barry had remained, a survivor with a legacy few could rival. But the question that haunted him was one fans had asked for decades. Had he ever truly forgiven the man he once hated more than anyone? In an interview during his later years, Barry was asked directly about it. The room fell silent as he took a long pause, his eyes distant. "I used to think hate gave me strength," he said softly. "But hate doesn't make you strong. It just keeps you chained to something that's already over." His words carried the weight of someone who had lived through pain, success, and loss all at once. Barry admitted that he had carried resentment far longer than he should have. "When you lose people you love, like my brothers, you realize how small grudges really are," he continued. "The people who hurt you, they're not worth your peace." Still, Barry didn't pretend forgiveness came easy. He confessed that the betrayal cut so deep because it wasn't about ego or competition. It was about trust. "You can't rewrite the past," he said. "You can only learn from it. I never hated him in the end. I just stopped needing him in my story." That quiet acceptance marked a turning point. Instead of letting bitterness define his later years, Barry turned his focus back to what had always healed him: music. In every performance, there was a depth and tenderness that fans hadn't heard before. When he sang "To Love Somebody" or "How Deep Is Your Love," it wasn't just nostalgia. It was reflection. A man singing to his memories, his regrets, and his ghosts. Friends close to Barry said that privately, he had written a letter to the person he once hated, not to send, but to release what was left inside him. He wanted closure, a confidant revealed. He didn't need an apology anymore. He just needed peace. That letter reportedly ended with one simple line: "I hope you found what you were looking for." I finally did. It wasn't about winning or losing anymore. Barry had realized that the true measure of strength isn't holding on to anger. It's letting go of it. In interviews after that time, his tone softened when asked about the old days. He no longer spoke of betrayal or rivalry. Instead, he talked about gratitude, for the journey, for the music, and for the fans who kept the Bee Gees' spirit alive long after the stage lights dimmed. When Barry was honored in music tributes and lifetime achievement ceremonies, he often mentioned his brothers, but never the man who wronged him. That silence spoke volumes. He had moved beyond needing to name the pain. He'd transcended it. In his later years, Barry's story became more than one of fame. It became one of forgiveness. The boy from Manchester who dreamed of making music with his brothers had grown into a man who learned that success means nothing without peace of mind. As he looked back on his life, Barry Gibb finally found that peace. He may never have fully reconciled with the person who betrayed him, but he no longer carried the bitterness that once defined their story. In his own words, "I've learned that even broken harmony is still a kind of music. Sometimes you just have to change the key." And with that, Barry Gibb closed the final chapter of one of music's most untold stories, not with anger, but with grace. Because in the end, even the deepest wounds can turn into songs. If your heart is brave enough to keep singing,